The world is still reeling from one of the most dramatic shifts in Middle East geopolitics in decades. A coordinated air and missile offensive by the United States and Israel struck deep into Iranian territory in a campaign that officials have named Operation Lion's Roar, marking a significant escalation after years of simmering tension over Iran's nuclear program, missile development, and regional influence. The strikes hit dozens of strategic targets across major cities, including Tehran, Isfahan, and Tabriz, from missile launchers and air defense systems to key military command centers. The offensive also reportedly struck the compound of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's longtime supreme leader, whose death was later confirmed by state media in the aftermath of the attacks. Immediately following the aerial barrage, Iran launched retaliatory strikes at U.S. and allied sites across the Gulf, including military bases in the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, and even toward British facilities in Cyprus, signaling that Tehran would respond swiftly and at distance to what it called an act of aggression. Against this backdrop, Joe Rogan, host of one of the largest media platforms in the world, delivered a compelling analysis that quickly went viral, distilling the volatile situation into a framework millions could understand. What he explained wasn't just what has already happened, but what could unfold next in a conflict with global consequences. Rogan began by acknowledging the enormity of the moment. This is not a contained operation, not a short bombing campaign, and not a remote proxy clash. What is unfolding involves multiple armies, capitals, energy choke points, and ancient rivalries, all amplified by modern technology and global interdependence. He explained that the conflict will likely evolve along several dimensions simultaneously: military, diplomatic, economic, and informational, with no single path predetermined. One key thread in his breakdown was the possibility that the current round of strikes and counterstrikes will not rapidly end, but rather transition into a protracted period of confrontation. Experts agree that Iran's retaliation so far signals its intention not to back down, but to impose costs on its adversaries while preserving its ability to respond. Rogan pointed out that Iran's missile and drone capabilities give it the ability to strike far beyond its borders, making any regional de-escalation far more complex than in past conflicts. Because Iran's response has already crossed multiple borders and targeted U.S. and allied bases, the framework for a simple ceasefire may be difficult to establish quickly. He also explained that in a conflict of this scale, diplomacy does not disappear, but it changes shape. While military assets engage one another, back-channel negotiations and international pressure begin to matter more, not less. Nations like Russia, China, and members of the European Union have already pushed for restraint and called for talks at the United Nations, highlighting that a purely military solution is unlikely to return lasting stability. Economically, Rogan said, the conflict will ripple through global markets. The Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of the world's oil passes, has become a strategic hotspot, and any disruption there could rapidly drive up energy prices worldwide. Insurers, shipping companies, and global commodity markets will respond long before diplomats settle behind closed doors. He warned that beyond physical attacks, economic and cyber fronts will increasingly matter. Nations could leverage sanctions, digital interference, and financial pressure in ways that don't make headlines but have real impact on citizens' lives. Cyber disruptions targeting energy grids, banking systems, or infrastructure could become as consequential as missile strikes, and much harder to trace or contain. Rogan also noted that internal political dynamics within Iran, the United States, and Israel will shape what happens next. In Tehran, Iranian leaders are now navigating a leadership vacuum and internal unrest following the death of their supreme leader, meaning decisions about escalation will be influenced by politics at home as much as strategic considerations abroad. In the United States, the administration's framing of the strikes as a lawful action to prevent nuclear threats, and its calls for Iran's people to rise against their government, have already generated debate over war aims and legitimacy. Analysts suggest that without a clear exit strategy, public support for sustained military involvement could be tested as casualties and costs mount. Across the region, smaller states such as those in the Gulf Cooperation Council find themselves caught between strategic alignment with Western powers and the risk of becoming unwilling battlegrounds. Their responses will influence whether the conflict remains concentrated or spreads wider. Rogan concluded by framing the conflict not as a single event, but as a crisis of interconnected consequences. He underscored that military actions always create openings for both escalation and diplomacy, and that the choices of leaders in Tehran, Washington, Jerusalem, and capitals in between will determine whether this moment becomes a catalyst for long-term war or a negotiated pause. In the coming days and weeks, global attention will likely remain fixed on this corner of the world, not simply because audiences are captivated by dramatic footage or crisis headlines, but because the outcomes here will influence the strategic balance, economic stability, and security calculations of nations far beyond the Middle East. What Rogan explained, and what experts echo, is that the next phase of this conflict isn't something that can be predicted with certainty, but something that must be managed across multiple fronts simultaneously: military, diplomatic, economic, information, and domestic politics. In a world where decisions made in one capital can trigger reactions in another the very same day, the next chapter in the US-Iran conflict will likely be defined as much by negotiation rooms and back-channel diplomacy as by battlefields and airspace. One thing Rogan emphasized is certain: the ripple effects have already begun, and how the world reacts now will shape not only the future of the Middle East, but the broader global order for years to come.